Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio version of the weekly Shema Yisrael newsletter titled To Remember and Be Remembered. And this was originally published on day 27 of month 6 on the Creator's calendar, otherwise known as September 20th, 2025 on the Roman calendar. Well, last week we discussed the importance of remembering the patterns of the past, and we continued the discussion about how this covenant journey described in the Torah actually began in Mesopotamia. From the Garden of Eden to Noah, to the Tower of Babel, to the calling of Abram, all these events originated in ancient Mesopotamia. And now that's a period of approximately 2,000 years. And if we consider that the scriptures turn to the promised seed and Israel for the next 2,000 years, those two periods cover the entirety of our scriptures up to the Messiah. So half of the history covered in the scriptures took place in Mesopotamia, and the other half focused on the land of Canaan, with a layover in Egypt. Well, the first half focused on humanity as individuals. The second half was about nations and the covenant established by Yahuwah for individuals from the nations to enter into. And the man Abram was the pivotal individual between these two periods. We're approaching the end of another 2,000-year period since the death and resurrection of the promised seed, Yeshua. And during that period of time, we see the chosen one building a family from the nations. Nothing has changed. The plan of Yahuwah has not changed, only shifted gears, so to speak. The covenant is still proceeding in the same direction towards the same destination. And it helps to remember and discern the big picture so that you don't end up on some crazy doctrinal path that leads to destruction. This is what we're currently witnessing with millions of Zionist Christians, dancing around, waving the banner of Saturn, and that's what the six-sided hexagram is. It's a symbol of Saturn. They're idolizing Jewish people and claiming they're the chosen people and they have some elite spiritual status for some reason. And they're generally ignoring the commandments of Yeshua concerning love. They're focused on a self-proclaimed chosen people rather than the chosen one and his specific teachings. If you try to point that out, and you try to point out the error of their ways, they decry that you're anti-Semitic. And the irony is that we're actually pro-Semitic when we teach the scriptures in their proper context, because the Semitic origins derive from the region where civilization began, Mesopotamia. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've been remembering some portions of the scriptures that actually harken back to Mesopotamian traditions, and only when we understand the history and the context do certain details and events in the scriptures actually make sense. This map here shows the journey that Abram took from Ur of the Chaldees, which is in the region of Mesopotamia, up along the Euphrates River to Haran and Padan Aram. And then he crossed over eventually and came down into the land. So that path almost symbolizes the transition from the scriptures itself as well. The first 2,000 to the east and then the second 2,000 to the west. Well, we talked about the creation account, getting back to the Mesopotamian traditions, and we also talked about the covenant ceremony involving Abram after he entered the land of Canaan. And these accounts seem to specifically factor in Mesopotamian traditions and practices. While the Enuma Elish claims that Marduk was the chief god of creation, the Torah says otherwise. Interestingly, there are also ancient Mesopotamian flood myths that were very prevalent in the past and have recently regained popularity through the Atrahasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh focused on the king of Uruk, described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And that points to him being a Nephilim offspring. During the flood story, Utnap Pishtim recounts the flood and concludes that immortality is reserved for the gods. And here is a clay tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Well, thankfully, the scriptures provide us another rendition of the flood, one filled with hope through the story of a pure man named Noah. You see, Gilgamesh was an abomination. He was the product of a forbidden relationship between the sons of Elohim and the daughters of Adam. That involved individuals violating the boundaries established for sexes and species by the Creator. The scriptures provide a specific description of the man who would be the savior, so to speak, of those made in the image of Elohim. Noah was a just, tzaddik man, perfect, tamim, in his generations. Noah walked with Elohim. Well, now remember, Noah was a Mesopotamian, yet he had a relationship with Elohim. Another way of describing him is righteous. That's a good translation of tzaddik, and blameless or clean is what tamim means. And that means he was walking in accordance with the instructions of Elohim. And it's the opposite of being lawlessness. It's the opposite of being lawless and the abomination that we saw with Gilgamesh. Well, the primary reason cited for the flood was due to the corruption of flesh through the fallen angels. So Elohim looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Creation was in a state of lawlessness, and it needed a reset. Yahweh preserved a man and his family because the man was obedient. So the message is that Yahweh will preserve those who walk with him. They are the obedient ones who trust in his provision, those who do it his way and not their own. Noah could have easily complained that the task was too great for him. Maybe he had some different ideas of how to preserve himself and his family from a flood. Well, nevertheless, he followed the plan. And as a result, during the account involving Noah, we're specifically shown how Yahweh will remember his people. And that's pertinent as we approach Yom Teruah, which is essentially Yahweh's Memorial Day, as we mentioned last week. We read about a time after Noah had been in the ark for 150 days. It says, then Elohim remembered Noah and every living thing, and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And Elohim made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. Well, the Hebrew word remember is zakar. Thankfully, Yahweh remembered Noah and the occupants of the ark. While they were saved and protected from the waters of judgment, they were not actually restored until the waters receded and they were able to exit the ark. And that's what Christians need to understand about salvation. It's not a decision, a one-time thing. It's a process. The flood event was just part of Noah's walk with Elohim. While his obedience resulted in the salvation of creation, it didn't ensure that anyone was going to go to heaven. He wasn't saved because he accepted Elohim or made a decision to walk with Elohim. He was saved because he listened, obeyed, and built the ark as Yahweh instructed. He followed the instructions and he lived. And interestingly, the word Torah means instructions. Now, obviously, unless Yahweh watched over the ark and remembered them, they ultimately would have sunk and drowned or starved to death. It is Yahweh who does the saving, but he wants us to do our part as we walk with him. That's why it's called a walk. For some, it's a sit or a sleep, and for others, it's a wait for the rapture. Sadly, they don't understand what it means to walk with Elohim. Well, Yahweh later entered into a covenant with the passengers of the ark, which was filled with Mesopotamians. There were no Hebrews, Israelites, or Jews in the ark. Interestingly, only one of them was Semitic, and that was Shem. He's the originator of the Shemites, or the Semites. The covenant focused on remembering, and Yahweh promised to remember as well. It was a new beginning, and it's no coincidence that there were 8 people on the ark. The number 8 represents new beginnings, and it's no coincidence that the 8th word in the Torah is haaretz, the earth. Indeed, the seventh word in the Torah is also haaretz. Now, Yahweh doesn't stutter. What we see is a message from the beginning that points to a renewed earth as part of the plan of Yahweh. After the flood, the language being used in the covenant even harkens back to the garden. And here's that passage. It says, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of Elohim he made man. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it." Then Elohim spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And Elohim said, "This is a sign of the covenant, which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember, Zakar, my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it and to remember the everlasting covenant between Elohim and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." And Elohim said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I establish between me and all flesh that is in the earth." Now the sons of Noah, who went out from the ark, were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. We'll consider the following language. "For in the image of Elohim he made man. Be fruitful and multiply." Well, this is all imagery from the creation account. And from the numerous instances of the Aleph Tah, we can see that the Messiah is an important part of the covenant going forward, the covenant with all flesh. So Yahweh made a covenant with his created beings and the earth, and he provided a sign so that we can all remember it. He didn't say he would not judge the planet again. He only promised that he would not do it by a flood. And whenever we see the sign of the seven-color rainbow, we should think about judgment. We should remember the past judgment and consider the judgment to come that we read about, particularly in Revelation. Well, I find it interesting that the movement that is focused on defying the order and boundaries that Yahweh established for his creation uses a profaned rainbow. The LGBTQ movement uses a six-colored rainbow to represent their interpretation of love. It's clearly intentional and indicative of the spiritual forces behind this rebellion against the ways of Elohim. It's not really much different than the rebellion that occurred that we read about in Genesis 6 involving the sons of Elohim mating with the daughters of man. They transgressed boundaries that Yah established, and the same spirit is operating today in the LGBTQ movement. Well, it appears that this will be one of the leading reasons for a future judgment, a judgment by fire. So we've talked about the rebellion in the garden, the rebellion before the flood, and we briefly mentioned the Tower of Babel. Of course, these three pivotal acts of rebellion in the scriptures occurred within the context of Mesopotamia and the first 2,000 years that we've just talked about. The disobedience in the garden resulted in the expulsion of the man and the woman from the presence of Elohim. The reason for the flood was due to the incursion of the fallen sons of Elohim and their attempted world takeover. This is a period from which much mythology is derived. And even though the scriptures just mention it briefly, we have all sorts of legends and tales from this period of time. And it had to be pretty intense. The stuff of fairy tales and science fiction fantasy. Well, the scriptures are intentionally concise in their details. Again, while the Mesopotamian writings are extensive and detailed concerning the Apkula guides, the scriptures don't give them much attention. They're just a side note. Indeed, the entire explanation for wiping out the entire planet was distilled down to just a few sentences in the following passage. It says, "Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And Yahweh said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120. And we've talked about that pattern of 120 on many different occasions. Could possibly be talking about 120 Jubilee years, which would be 6,000 years total. So that would give man and flesh a limitation of 6,000 years. And that's consistent with the pattern of 6 days and the first 6 words of the Torah. Well, there were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Again, this is the stuff of mythology and legends that we still hear about today. Well, then Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahweh was sorry that he'd made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So Yahweh said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, but both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. Thank goodness for that but, and thank goodness for Noah. So those sons of Elohim produced men of renown, and that's where we see the likes of Gilgamesh, Oliah, and Haya, to name a few. These were giants named in the book of Giants. The text of 1st Enoch describes how bad things apparently got, but we only have glimpses through these traditions. Again, I've said it repeatedly, I don't consider 1st Enoch to be scriptures per se. I think they provide us with people's understanding from around, it's hard to date it specifically, but it was around the 2nd century BCE, 1st century BCE. That's when they date the various portions of 1st Enoch. And again, these are really just kind of traditions that were written down. It wasn't written by Enoch. And again, thank goodness for Noah. What a guy he must have been to stay true to Elohim during that incredibly chaotic time in history. Can only imagine what it was like. And this was apparently an extinction level event. Yahweh does not punish the righteous with the unrighteous. Therefore, it's safe to say that when it started raining, Noah and his family were the only righteous ones left on earth. Well, sadly, despite the sign of the rainbow, men have failed to remember. Those stubborn Mesopotamians decided they were going to go their own way again. With the influence of their Apkallo guides, they were going to worship the hosts of heaven instead of Yahweh. They were feeling pretty cocky and arrogant, and historically we understand that there was an arrogance about the Babylonians. They just thought they were the creme de la creme because their achievements after the flood. And they decided that they were going to make a name for themselves. They were going to build a house for their God. They were going to build something impressive and spectacular that they could take pride in. Remember how men would create images of gods and presume to imbue them with the presence of the God? Well, this was similar, only now they would build a house for their God. And of course, their God would come and reside in it if they built it. Remember that baseball movie with Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come. And that's pretty much the mentality of the Babylonians, We're going to build this, and then our God is going to come down and dwell in it, as if they were in control of their God. Well, last week we talked about how they would presume to cleanse, heal, and purify through their implements, the torch and a censer. And we also talked about the plan of Yahweh to build a living tabernacle through the pattern of the woman. Well, after the Tower of Babel, we see men defying those plans. The tower was a temple, a ziggurat. their own stairway to heaven where they could go up and pierce the veil and their God would come down to visit, all on their terms. They were going to make their names great. It was not about glorifying Yahuwah. Instead, it was about conquering the heavens and controlling their gods. It was man-made religion. And here's the account in the scriptures. It says, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They had brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.' But Yahuwah came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And Yahuwah said, 'Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.' So Yahuwah scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there Yahuwah confused the language of all the earth, and from there Yahuwah scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Well, these were not the plans of Elohim being implemented by his servants. This was about rebellious men seeking to do things on their own terms. It was all about them and their plans. Yahuwah didn't design the city or the tower, and he did not sanction their plans or their efforts. And that's very similar to what we see going on with a bunch of people calling themselves chosen today, forcing their way back into the covenant land with the support of the Illuminati and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and without the presence of Elohim, and certainly without the Messiah. In fact, they've set themselves diametrically opposed to the Messiah. They're trying to serve their God on their own terms through their own works in defiance of the Son. Well, the rebellion and defiance that we presently observe are actually worse than what occurred at Babel, because it's happening in the land that belongs to Yahuwah after he sent his Son. Again, we have the benefit of history, and so do the Jewish people, trying to defy the judgment that was rendered in 70 CE. Of course, the really sad part is that it's being funded and supported by Christian Zionists who claim to follow the Messiah. They are truly deceived. According to Psalm 127:1, it says, "Unless Yahuwah builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless Yahuwah guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." Well, at Babel, Yahuwah divided the people into nations. And in Deuteronomy 32:7-8, we read something very interesting. It says, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Elohim." Now, many translations put the sons of Israel in there, and that's a blatant error. And that's one of the things that we've discovered from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are 1,000 years older than the oldest Hebrew Masoretic script of the Torah. The Masoretic text says sons of Israel, but the older Dead Sea Scrolls say sons of Elohim. And that's consistent, because sons of Israel doesn't even make sense. Israel wasn't even, at the Tower of Babel, there was no Israel at that point. And Abram was only chosen after the Tower of Babel. So sons of Elohim is a very consistent and logical phrase to include there. And the verse is interesting because it validates the notion of oral tradition, first of all. As we discussed previously, the children of Israel were well aware of Mesopotamian traditions because their elders told them about them. And here Yahweh is specifically telling them to ask their fathers, ask their elders about the Tower of Babel. They'll tell you. One of the things that they might have mentioned was the tradition written in the book of Yashar that there were 70 sons of Elohim that accompanied Yahweh on this reconnaissance mission at Babel. And that's why the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 specifically lists 70 descendants of Noah. And that's why the number 70 represents the nations in the scriptures. And that, by the way, is why 70 bulls are slaughtered during Sukkot. It commemorates the nations finally returning through Joseph, the bull, representing the house of Israel. The feast begins with 13 bulls on day 1, representing the number of tribes after Israel adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, then counting down to 7 bulls on day 7. So 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7 equals 70. Then on the 8th day, Shema Yisrael, which is an entirely separate appointed time, 1 bull is offered, and that symbolizes when the nations are restored as one, Echad, to Yahuwah. It's a time for new beginnings. Well, the Tower of Babel was a major fracturing of creation that needs to be repaired, and that is a major focus of the end times. And as we're approaching the upcoming Memorial Day, we should remember the previous appointed time that we celebrated several months ago, Shavuot. One cannot ignore the parallels between Babel, Mount Sinai, and Acts 2 in Jerusalem that all occurred on Shavuot. And as we discussed previously, I believe these were all Shavuot events, and we can see the transition from the man-made mountain at Mesopotamia to the mountain of Sinai in Midian to the mountain at Jerusalem. That will be the final fulfillment we'll see the final fulfillment through another mountain, Mount Zion. Well, Acts 2 was not a final fulfillment of Shavuot, by the way. There's more to come. And after the Tower of Babel event, the scriptures immediately focus on Shem and his descendant Abram. Yahuwah chose Abram for a purpose. It says, "Now Yahuwah had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Well, this marks the point when the focus of the scriptures departs from Mesopotamia, literally through Abram, and what you have to understand is that Yahuwah essentially divorced himself from mankind after Babel. That's why he divided people and set sons of Elohim over them. He was not going to be their God anymore. He would set other sons of Elohim over them, and he would choose Abram and his seed to restore this division and this separation. And thankfully, he did not give up on mankind. He quickly set about working on a plan to restore the relationship, but people would be given a choice. They had alternative gods to choose from. He's only looking for people who willingly choose him. And that's why the focus shifts to the process of restoration through a promised seed. After Yahuwah divided the nations from Mesopotamia, he chose Abram to leave Mesopotamia and make a great nation elsewhere among the nations. Why? Abram was chosen so that Yahuwah could bring forth a seed that would draw people out of the nations to join the family of Elohim and fill his house. That would require a marriage covenant. And that's the meaning of the phrase, "and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." In other words, through this seed, I'm going to restore the nations. And as we discussed last week, that promised seed was revealed to the world on Yom Teruah, over 2,000 years ago. Now, there's an interesting article on the Torah calendar website titled "The Birth of Yeshua the Messiah." It details how the great sign of Revelation 12, 1-2 was visible in the sky when Yeshua was born, and the branch, Spica, touched down on the earth to tabernacle with man. And this is a chart from the Torah calendar article and website, and I encourage you to check it out at www.torahcalendar.com. As we prepare to celebrate the appointed times of month 7, it's critical to remember the appointed times of month 1. They parallel one another. Again, we get the big picture here when we step back and look at the totality of things. The two 7-day feasts, or Hagim, bookend one another within the period of 7 months, and it's all a pattern for us to learn. On day 1 of month 1, when Moses and Aaron were told to look to the light of the new moon and start counting, they began a 10-day count to Lamb Selection Day on day 10 of month 1, leading up to the Passover. We do the same, but with the benefit of hindsight. While they were counting in order to select a lamb to slaughter so they could leave Egypt, we counted 10 knowing that our lamb is Yeshua. And there's no coincidence that Lamb Selection Day on day 10 of month 1 parallels Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, on day 10 of month 7. As we look to the light of this 7th renewed moon, we understand that our decision concerning a lamb on day 10 of month 1 has a direct impact on our fate as we arrive at day 10 of month 7. We may look at some of the other parallels as we progress through the appointed times of month 7, because they're very intriguing. For now, we need to be focused on Yom Teruah, which we expect to occur after sunset on Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, when the renewed moon should be visible. You'll find teachings all over the internet calling it the Feast of Trumpets. If you see that, it likely means the person doesn't really know what they're talking about. Yom Teruah is not a feast, which is Hag in Hebrew. There are 3 specific appointed times that are designated as feasts or Hagim, namely unleavened bread, which is 7 days, Shavuot, which is 1 day, and Sukkot, which is 7 days. When you see a 7-day feast, it typically would make you think of a wedding celebration, and it should. Of course, these 3 feasts are points of celebration that mark the restoration of the major events that resulted in the separation of mankind from Elohim. While they initially happened in Mesopotamia, we see them later repeated through Israel. And that's why it's so important for people to understand that the appointed times are not Jewish holidays. While the Jews may have holidays that mimic the appointed times, the appointed times of Yahweh belong to Him, and they are a pattern for the return of man and the nations to Him through His Son. You cannot properly observe them without acknowledging the Son. Well, the word Yom means day, so it is a day, not a feast, and it is connected with the word Teruah. Here's the command again. It says, Then Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall have a Shabbat rest, a Shabbaton, a memorial of blowing, Teruah, a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh. That's Leviticus 23 through 25. And another commandment is found in the text of Numbers. At Numbers 29:1, it says, And in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work, for it is a day of blowing, Teruah, Yom Teruah. Well, as you can see, it's really not even given a name or a title. It's just a day for us to do something. It's the 1st day of the 7th month. It's a Sabbath day of rest. It's a holy convocation, which is Mikra Kadosh, and it's a memorial and a day of blowing. While many texts indicate a memorial of blowing trumpets or a day of blowing trumpets, the text does not specifically include the word for trumpets, which is Hatzot Tzara. Instead, the text simply refers to Teruah, which can involve blowing, blasting, and even shouting. Teruah is a loud noise, typically a trumpet or shofar blast, but again, it can include shouting. The noise is emitted by one individual and heard by another. It's a form of communication intended to evoke a response. There's a passage in the Torah that refers to specific instruments for making a sound. It says, And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Make 2 silver trumpets, and here the word is trumpet, for yourself. You shall make them of hammered work. You shall use them for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of camps. When they blow both of them, all the congregation shall gather before you at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. But if they blow only one, Then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel, shall gather to you. When you sound the advance, the camps that lie on the east shall then begin their journey. When you sound the advance the second time, then the camps that lie on the south shall begin their journey. They shall sound a call for them to begin their journeys. And when the assembly is to be gathered together, you shall blow, but not sound the advance. The sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow the trumpets, and these shall be to you as an ordinance forever throughout your generations. When you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with trumpets, and you will be remembered before Yahweh your Elohim, and you will be saved from your enemies. Also in the day of your gladness, in your appointed times, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings. And they shall be a memorial for you before your Elohim. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. So we can see from this passage that the sound, teruah, of the trumpets served various functions. The silver trumpets had a distinct sound that would be used to call and direct the assembly to action. When blown in time of battle, Yahweh would remember them and deliver them. They were also blown during appointed times, new moons, and over the offerings as a memorial. So it would appear that on day 1 of month 7, we're supposed to focus on those offerings, since we're instructed to perform a memorial teruah. Again, on Yom Teruah, we specifically look to the birth of the Messiah, and we remember the offering of Yeshua leading up to Yom Kippur. Next week, we'll focus more on Yom Kippur and the connection with the Jubilee year that is celebrated with the sound of a shofar, the teruah of a shofar. As mentioned many times in the past, the commandment concerning the Jubilee day, day 10, and year, day 50, is specifically marked by a shofar blast. The shofar is the teruah device of the common man. In fact, most of the time when you read the word trumpet in the English translations of the Bible, it's referring to a shofar, which is a ram's horn. It's not something made by man. For instance, in Ezekiel, we read about the watchman using the shofar as a warning device. Ezekiel 33, 3-6. When he sees the sword coming upon the land, if he blows the shofar and warns the people, then whoever hears the sound of the shofar and does not take warning, if the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be on his own head. He heard the sound of the shofar, but did not take warning. His blood shall be on himself, but he who takes warning will save his life. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the shofar, and the people are not warned, and the sword comes and takes any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. Well, in ancient times, the watchman would keep watch throughout the night. It was a lonely and critical job, and as the previous psalm said, if Yah is not guarding, then the watchman watches in vain. But essentially, many lives depended upon the watchman. There were no phones, comms, or walkie-talkies. He had a shofar and maybe a torch. If he saw danger approaching, he would shout and sound the shofar. And the point was to wake people up so that they would be ready when the enemy arrived. We read about that in Joel. It says, blow the shofar in Zion and sound the alarm, the teruah, in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh is coming, for it is at hand. In the Hebrew text, we see that sound the alarm is teruah, which is directly associated with the blast of the shofar. The purpose of the teruah shout and the shofar blast is to make a noise to wake people and get their attention. In this case, it's to make an announcement. The day of Yahweh is coming. Indeed, it is upon us. So the teruah is a noise intended to wake people up and get their attention, and it's a call to action and intended to make an announcement. And here's some examples. For instance, it's time to gather. Pack up and move out. It's time to celebrate. The appointed time has arrived. The renewed moon has been sighted. An offering to Yahweh is being made. Remember the reason why. We're surrounded. The enemy is approaching. Grab your weapon. It's time for battle. These are all messages that would be transmitted through the Teruah. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but how about this one? Wake up. The bridegroom is coming. It's time to go meet him. Well, that's a Teruah that Yeshua specifically warned us about, a midnight cry, a shout in the darkness. It's something we should be listening and preparing for. Matthew 25, 1-7, he says, Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. Now again, consider the context of Yom Teruah in the cycle of the appointed times. Yom Teruah is 10 days before Yom Kippur. And number 10, of course, we just saw the 10 virgins there. Number 10 points to judgment. The 10th letter in the Hebrew alphabet is Yud. It represents an arm. When the judgment is executed, the arm of Yahweh reaches down and renders his justice. It's interesting that the 10th word in Torah is Tohu, which describes the after effects of judgment, chaos, empty, worthless, void. There's no doubt that Yom Kippur points to judgment, but it is also a time of restoration and return for those who are covered, like Noah and his family. The key is that Yahweh remembers us during the time of judgment. Psalm 106:4 says, Oh, remember me, O Yah, with the favor you have toward your people. Oh, visit me with your salvation, your Yeshua. As we prepare to celebrate Yahweh's Memorial Day, there's a lot to remember, from the garden to the flood to the tower to the mountain at Sinai to the mountain in Jerusalem. We also have a lot to look forward to at the mountain called Zion. It's all about the restoration of the kingdom, and we are invited to participate in that process. Now, throughout the years, I've often had people ask me how to celebrate the various appointed times. Once they realize that there's an important appointment to keep, they then want to know how to keep the appointment. And I'm reticent to give them a bunch of traditions and rituals to follow, because there are none in the scriptures concerning Yom Teruah. They only tell us to make a noise, and the focus is on remembering. When we consider the fact that this is all about repairing the disconnect between Elohim and his amazing soil man, Adam, made in his image, it all begins to become clear. Man at Babel desired to make a name for himself instead of exalting the name of Yahweh. Yahweh ended up separating them into nations and taking Abram as his portion. The only way back is through his family and the promised seed, the son born on Yom Teruah, to the shouts and blasts of those rehearsing at the right time. We long for the son to return at the sound of a shofar to establish his kingdom and make a name for himself. We celebrate all that he has done and what he is about to do. We Teruah, to remember and be remembered. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett from ShemaYisrael.net.